My poor guest had to listen to me complain pre-show about the state of my New York sports team, so I apologize to him in advance. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Mike the New Haven podcast, episode 342. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, Volume 5 of the Best the Bravest Nationwide edition, that was with Dan Jones. Dan Jones did 41 years in the fire service, between 16 years in Pinellas Park, Florida. Then in 1990, he went over to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, stayed on there for 25 years, finished up as their chief. And that was a really fascinating conversation with him. He's been active, of course, in teaching, both while his career was going on and, of course, in retirement as well. And I'm very happy with where that miniseries is because, as we said last episode, between The Beat and the Best and Bravest Nationwide, it's good that we're expanding outside the New York City area. But at the podcast's core, it's very centric to New York, so we'll continue to do New York City-themed interviews with our NYPD and FDNY friends, one of which is joining us tonight. Who we'll introduce momentarily, but just want to say a quick welcome to everyone that is watching, whether you be tuning in via LinkedIn, via YouTube, or via Facebook this evening. And I see John Costello and Chris Ebden in the chat, as they always are. Great to see both of you gentlemen. John, I didn't forget about you. I'm going to hang up that decoration behind me soon. We're working on it. Just have to find the time. But thank you once again for sending that. And, of course, we'll get to a couple of ads momentarily. Of course, this is another feature of our active miniseries, Features of the Finest. But before we get to tonight's guest and chronicle his excellent and very fascinating career in the NYPD and the New York City Transit Police, we will run MC Media Editing Services. Need advice on how to start your podcast? Frustrated with the editing process? Can't find a voiceover guy? Hi, I'm Mike Colón, and I'm here to help. I'm the owner and founder of MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company for all things media, where I can offer you consulting advice on how to get started, and once you get started, editing, as well as voiceover work, all for a very reasonable price. If you want to reach me, you can contact me at 917-781-6189 or the email that you see listed here. I'm always available, and I'm always willing to help. Again, 917-781-6189. Why go to some giant consulting firm that's going to charge you an arm and a leg when you can just come to me? If you want to be stress-free, the way to go is to call MC. MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company. And ever a good friend and frequent guest of this show, of course, is Billy Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike the New Haven podcast. Proud supporter indeed. And hello to Joe Maliga. I will make sure to get to your question tonight. We know what the running joke is, of course, between us, and I'm sure I will have the opportunity to ask it at some point during this program. All right, my next guest enjoyed a 27-year law enforcement career that took him from the subways to the airways. Starting in 1991 with the old New York City Transit Police, pre-merged with the NYPD. He lateraled before the merger, went over to the NYPD in 1992, and for 13 years, he was on patrol as a Brooklyn cop in the Greenpoint section of the borough in the 9-4 precinct before his 2005 transfer to the Aviation Unit, where he would spend the next 13 years until he retired in 2018. And along the way, was promoted to Detective Third Grade and Detective Second Grade, and received the NYPD's Medal of Valor, one of the highest awards a member of the service can receive, for a 2012 rescue he'll detail tonight with me, and that is retired NYPD detective and former member of the NYPD Aviation Unit, Mike Sileo. Mike, great to have you finally. Welcome. How are you?
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Like I said off the air to you before we got on, I first saw you with our friend Bill Cannon many years ago on Police Off the Cuff. Thought to myself, I got to get that guy. So it took me a few years, took me long enough, but finally you're here and we'll hear your stories tonight. So, as I ask every guest of a civil service background, well, first and foremost, where did you grow up? And secondly, did you always want to go into this field, or was it something you discovered you'd be interested in a little bit later on?
So I grew up in Queens, Ridgewood, Glendale area, and my dad was a cop. So I was always fascinated. He used to have on the rare occasion, he would work in like the Brooklyn North area, and we lived in Queens. And occasionally he would come home and get gas in the 104 precinct. And when he did that, he would stop at the house at times. And every time I came in, I saw the uniform. I just kind of admired it more and more. And it was just something that I just I was just fascinated by it. I always wanted to do it. I always wanted to help people. And my dad would come home and tell certain stories, and I was like, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be. And there I was. It was a passion that I had.
And it showed in the career that you wound up having as well. And as always, for those of you in the chat, if you want to ask a question either via LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, feel free to throw it in there, I should say, and we'll highlight it at the appropriate time, myself and producer Vic. So transit's interesting because it's not a bad time to be there in 91 in that Bratton's there, Maple's there, and the agency is on the come up. They got new vehicles around this time. They're getting better equipment around this time, and crime is going down in the subway, even though above ground's not looking too pretty in 1991, 92. Below ground is starting to improve a lot. So getting there, especially where you were first assigned, which was, you were telling me off air, was District 33. What was it like trying to learn the subway? And were you a kid that took the subway a lot in Queens, or did you have to get familiarized with it as a transit cop?
No, I was familiar with the subway. I mean, living in New York City, we took the subway a lot. Friends and I would go to Manhattan or wherever. So I had the M train close to my house, and it would be a frequent thing for me to get on the train. So I wasn't no stranger to the subway system. However, when I took the exam, I didn't expect to be a transit police officer. I was thrown into the lottery. And in fact, I went down to find out what agency I was assigned, prior to hiring. My dad came with me, and there's this old printout, this green bar paper, just on dot matrix, with the holes on the side. And right next to everybody's name was just a T, a C, or an H, for transit, city, or housing. So I got transit. And I can't say I was disappointed because I was just ecstatic that I was getting hired, but I was kind of I wanted to be a city cop. That was my dream. But I went in, and the one of the guys there who was talking to us and gave us a nice pep talk. You guys are going to be the first class with 9mm weapons. You got these nice sweaters. They were changing the uniforms. Bratton had just taken over the police department, the transit police department at the time. So they really gave us a nice pep speech about what was coming forth in the future. And it kind of made me excited for it. So, I was on board at that time.
Of course. And in District 33, we're talking East New York. So it's a tough place to start as a cop. And it doesn't matter how much experience you have. I mean, especially back then, transit was dangerous. And transit's not easy now, but
Yeah.
transit was dangerous then. I mean, because this is the conversation I've had with a few transit alumni. It's quite literally, I think, across the country, not just in the city of New York, the most unique beat a cop could have because your community is transient, quite literally. At least if you're a housing cop back then, you know where the people are going to be. There's a set place where they're going to be. And, even if they're out all day working or doing whatever, they're going to be there at some point because that's where they live. Unless it's a homeless person in the subway system, people are coming and going. And maybe you recognize certain faces because that's their everyday commute, but you don't get the chance to really mingle with them as much unless there's calls going on or you're riding the train. So just learning, not even with the call standpoint or dealing with criminals, just learning how to deal with people in a district as busy as that one. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I was always around people, growing up. So that wasn't the big challenge. I think the bigger challenge was working alone
Mm-hmm.
and not having backup pretty close to you. And I was signed to TPF, which didn't at the time prior to me joining. It turned out at 42nd Street and 8th Avenue in Manhattan. However, they started handing it off to the districts. So I did a TPF stint in District 33, which started at 7 o'clock at night. I think we ended at like 4 in the morning. And now I'm riding the subways as a 20-year-old kid by myself in bad neighborhoods, high crime neighborhoods, where our biggest challenge was the radio reception in the subways. So you had to learn how to adapt to that environment, and you had to know where the other guy was and what station they were. We didn't have cell phones then, So, it was just, it was eye-opening in the sense that you always had to watch your back. You always had to look over your shoulder and have your back to the wall at all times, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah, and that's something that guides any cop throughout their careers. Chris Ebden, a former member of New York City EMS, in the chat says the woolly pulley sweaters, as he coins them, were pretty nice. EMS actually followed transit in allowing us to wear them.
Yeah. Yeah, they were we got a lot of laughs when they first came out, and then some guys started to say, "Those are pretty cool looking," you know?
Yeah, no, of course, of course. So there was a story you were going to tell me. I just wanted to hear it on the air so that the listeners could enjoy it too. Late night, 3 in the morning in transit.
Yeah, so, we would ride these trains late at night, and they were single posts. And I remember one night I was on the J line, and I think we had my post probably went from like Lorimer Street on the J all the way over the Williamsburg Bridge into Marcy Avenue. I'm sorry, beyond Marcy Avenue into Essex Street. So when you got on the train at Marcy Avenue, or if you continued, that's like a 7 minute or 9 minute ride over the Williamsburg Bridge. So now if you get into something on the bridge, on the train that's moving, your help is not there's nowhere, nobody's going to get to you because you're on this train for a 9 minute stretch. So I remember getting on the train, Marcy Avenue, and there was this big guy. I was a young 20-year-old skinny kid. I probably weighed about 130 pounds, and he was probably about 6 feet 8. I mean, he was a tall guy, and he was drunk. I could tell and he wanted to fight. So I'm in the car, and he's in the other car behind me, and he starts walking through the train, and he starts giving me these motions that he wants to fight. He's putting his hands like this, and I'm like, oh shit, what am I going to do here? Am I going to call an 85? But if I do call an 85, how long is it going to take them to get here? They're not going to get here on the bridge. So I started, to tactically and mindfully think, all right, let me just give myself some time here. And I started walking through the train. As I'm walking through the train, I'm probably in the fifth or sixth car. He's following me. Now, when I get to the first car, we're probably halfway across the bridge. And then my mind said to myself, we've got keys for these trains. So I locked the door, and he's in the middle of the two trains trying to get in, and he's punching his fists. And I'm like, all right, let me call an 85. So I called an 85, and I said, I'm, probably 4 minutes out of Essex Street. And then we rolled into the station, and there's the cavalry waiting, and they're like, who's the guy? And I point, and I go, that's to him. And it turned out it was probably just a discount collar, but I avoided any type of interaction at that point, specifically on that long stretch. And I'll never forget that moment. It was something to be, as a young rookie cop, it's the last thing you want to be involved in.
Right. And really any cop. And that was smart. You used your head.
Yeah.
That was very clever to think about that on the fly in a situation like that. Some people panic. I mean, it's just a natural human instinct. You slowed down, you analyzed the situation, you found a solution to where you didn't get hurt, he didn't get hurt. You
Right.
isolated, as Paul Manicone, retired NYPD lieutenant in the chat put. You moved, you isolated, and you contained it. That's a good job.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what you had to do. You had to think on your feet, and always be prepared for something to happen like that, because it's 3 o'clock in the morning. People are drinking. They're coming out of clubs, and a lot of people, when they drink, they either want to sleep or they want to fight.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy wanted to fight,
Mm-hmm.
and I would have lost. I would have lost.
I mean, I think unless you're his size, anybody in that situation, even if you know martial arts or whatever, a 6'8" drunk guy, not the kind of person you want to be getting
Exactly.
into, even when he's sober, let alone when he's under the influence of something.
Sure.
And Lieutenant Manicone adds, very smart. They should teach that in the academy, and they should. They should, because that's a great move for all parties involved. Last note on trans before I get to you lateraling to the NYPD. Besides that moment, was there ever a holy crap, that could have gone really bad moment that you had in transit?
I mean, I can't tell you how many times you'd see people, and I'll get to the intoxication part of it, but like people on the train that are drunk and they're walking on these platforms at night, and they're coming to the edge, and I couldn't tell you how many times I've seen people that almost fell on the tracks. That was the big. I had one guy fall on the tracks. Just prior to my arrival into the station, and luckily he landed in the middle, in that well there, and there was no doubt. He just kind of split his head open. He was a drunk guy. But the last thing you want to see is somebody get chopped up by a train. And luckily, I never had it as a transit cop, although I did have it when I was a street cop.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's ironic. You didn't have it in transit, but you had it above ground. And that brings us to the tail end of 1992. Granted, you did always want to be an NYPD cop, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
So it's fitting, it's just, especially with your family legacy, your father having been on the job, the opportunity to lateral presented itself. What I find interesting is that, and I don't know if this was annoying to some cops or if you didn't mind it, you had just done the academy the year before. So, you would think in some places are different. In other places, if you have gone to school recently, they won't send you back. You just, maybe you get a little in-house orientation and you're off and running. Here, I think you had to go back to the academy, right?
Yeah, we had to go back. I think it was about 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And the worst part about it was they disarmed us. So now, we're active police officers. At the time, I was, I think, probably on the job maybe 18 months or so. And then there was some contention there that they're going to take away our weapons. And the reason why was because as a transit cop, we had 9 millimeters, and the NYPD hadn't adapted to the 9 millimeters yet.
No, not yet.
So there was some ambiguity there of what are they going to do with us. So what they did was they said, our first few days in the academy there, they handed us the new NYPD shields, and we had to turn over all the other transit stuff, and they took our 9 millimeter weapons. They were vouchered. And then we had some representative there from the PVA and the academy that said, you can't put these guys on the subway. We were coming in with uniform. We were in NYPD uniforms, but we were unarmed. So, we're riding the trains in uniform, unarmed. I mean, that was, going to the police academy. So what they did was they pulled us all into Rodman's Neck, and they got us qualified really fast in the 38s. At least the transit guys, because the housing guys had 38s at the time. But we had to go back and do a whole firearms course again, and relinquish our 9 millimeters, now go backwards to a 38 weapon. So
Right.
that was pretty unique.
Yeah, and it took a couple years until Bratton got to the NYPD in '94 to where they got the 9 millimeters again, which they've had ever since. Because, and it's sad that it took this long. This was almost a decade-long battle between the unions and the department itself. It all started when Scott Goodell got killed back in '86.
Yeah.
He is the speed loaders. He couldn't load in enough time. Not his fault. Some animal walked up behind him like a coward and shot him in the back of the head.
Yeah.
But you would think it would have happened soon after his murder in '86, '87. Didn't really take full effect for the NYPD until much later in 1994. So getting to the 9-4 out of the academy again for the second time. For those not familiar with the Greenpoint section of Brooklyn, tell me about the demographics. High crime area, low crime area, right in the middle.
Nah, I would say really low crime area, especially for Brooklyn North. I mean, they used to call it the oasis of Brooklyn North.
Mm-hmm.
Because it really was, you had predominantly Polish neighborhood, maybe some Hispanic, a little black in the projects, but predominantly Polish, and a lot of hardworking, blue collar people. That's what the 9-4 consisted of. And we had, not only did we have a lot of great restaurants to eat, we had a lot of good looking women, that would walk the streets. So a lot of outside commands would come there and get their meal, or, just come to get gas occasionally, just to kind of, be in the oasis of Brooklyn North. So yeah, it was a great command, low crime. I think any command, even if it's low crime, has a propensity of something big happening there. But the 9-4 kind of held up pretty well. And to this day, I think it's less of the blue collar and more of like the kind of beatnik, or the I don't know what to group that, but it's kind of a melting pot of people. Let's call it that, because I think that's what they identified as now. So
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's
It's a trendy, it's a trendy neighborhood. It's kind of like the Soho in some sense.
A little bit, well, a lot of gentrification.
Yes, a lot of gentrification. Yes.
And Brooklyn's kind of been, I don't want to say hardest hit, because sometimes, when you hear gentrification, it has a negative context. In some aspects, it can be, but not in others. If a neighborhood's going to advance forward and be a lot better than what it was before, especially if it used to be a high crime area, that's a good thing. That means the police are doing their job to where they can get the neighborhood to that point where it can be gentrified.
Sure.
But it does change a lot to the city, especially when you have transplants coming in from outside, which is a different story for a different day. But it's always interesting to see an evolution, especially when people post online photos. Here's what it was in 1993. Here's what it is now.
Sure.
And again, NYPD's at the forefront of that. So, I mean, policing above ground versus policing below ground. Granted, you weren't in transit very long, but habits do come into play, especially with what they were teaching you in the academy. Did it take a while to adjust that, or was the transition seamless?
No, I think I had a little growing pains in the beginning, because I come to the command, and now, here I am. I'm thinking of some big hairbag on the job. I have 18 months on the job, And and they stuck me with a graduating police academy class in an FTU unit. So I was kind of like the younger guys they're literally out on the street the first day, and I'm arriving with them. It was just, we both arrived at the same day. So here I am. I'm thinking I'm this big hairbag, and this seasoned veteran coming into the 9-4 precinct. But surrounding me are veterans in the 9-4 precinct that are looking down at me like I'm the new guy. So, it had its growing pains. I kind of knew my role. I kept my mouth shut when I was there learning until I got out of the FTO role and the FTU role. And then I got myself into a sector car with a steady partner who happened to also lateral transfer with me. And we worked together in District 33. So we worked together for almost all of our careers until I left for aviation.
Right. Well, that's pretty cool. I mean, again, full circle, and at least there's a comfort level there because, listen, eventually, even if you do form a great partnership with someone in the beginning, like you said, there is growing pains. They don't know you, you don't know them. You didn't have that worry, so at least it's one less thing to where you could say, okay, whew, at least that's off the board. One less worry I have as I try to get used to the NYPD.
Yeah, exactly.
Pendulum swinging at this time. Ray Kelly is in his first stint as commissioner. And as I've said before in the program, people remember him more for his second stint as commissioner because that was obviously the longest. But he did a lot of good things in that short-term period that he was there, 92 to 94. Got the crime down. Things were beginning to swing in the right direction. Bratton comes in. The crime decline, which is already starting and nudging downward, really takes a nosedive. And broken windows changed a lot because, unfortunately, because of the corruption scandals in the 70s and 80s, cops, no pun intended, were handcuffed. They couldn't really be proactive the way they wanted to be. Bratton comes in, takes the handcuffs off, and says, no, let's be the police. So being there, even if you were in a low crime area, which thankfully Greenpoint was, as you said, it was the oasis, being there when the style shifted from what it was before, apprehensive, reactive, to proactive and prevention, how is that as a young cop in the city?
It gave us a lot of flexibility. And I think we had an easier ability to conduct the type of policing that should have been done in the city rather than a reactive type of policing. So we went from taking, complaint reports, 61s, to actually proactively identifying what the crime patterns were and then to be in those locations and what to look for, rather than just respond when a complainant calls and take a report, throw it in the 124 room and go back on patrol. So, it definitely, and we enjoyed that. I mean, I think for the most part, I know I did, and my partner, we wanted to be cops. We wanted to help people. We didn't want to be report takers, and riding around in the sector, I got to know people in my sector. I got to know who the players were, who the bad guys were, who the good guys were, and who was looking out for us. And, we used all of those tools, and it was so effective that it's sad to watch the state of what the NYPD is in now and the challenges they're facing. And I kind of feel spoiled because I got to experience that. I wish the newer generation got to experience what we did,
Yeah, and hopefully they can before I continue. Scott, I don't know his last name, but he's retired from transit. He says, is that Mikey No Shoulders?
Oh, God. I know Scott. I know who that is. Yeah. We had a lot of names for each other at the time. So, and that was one of my names. There you go.
Good to see you, Scott. Nice to see you, Scott. He tells me he's waiting until some of his last friends who are still in the job retire, and then he can come on the show. So hopefully that's soon.
Okay.
He's got a lot of stories because he did 25 years. Again, I don't know his last name. I only know his first name. But with that said, I mean, again, I asked you about, he says this is butthead. So, I asked you about dicey calls earlier in transit. And even if you're working in a low crime area, there is that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be dicey, that, okay, wow, that was something that was quite the rush. What are some of the calls from that early period of patrol in Greenpoint that stick out as, man, wow, that was a good call?
Like, you mean what kind of jobs did we respond to that were?
Yeah, any type of job. Doesn't have to be a hairy job, just something where it's like, wow, you know what? That was a good call. We did really well there.
I can't think of anything that comes to mind right now, but I mean, the odds of some of the stuff, some of the pursuits from other precincts, from the A3 or from the 90, or even as far away as the 108, which bordered us, would come into our precinct all the time for some reason. And I do remember one time where they had a vehicle pursuit. It was for a GLA. It was for a stolen vehicle. They were chasing the car. They kind of lost sight of the car. And then moments later, we got a job of a 53. It was a car accident, and it was a car that collided with a tractor trailer. and it was the stolen GLA. It went under the tractor trailer, took the roof off, decapitated one of the perps, and we got into a foot pursuit with my partner and I. We caught one of the guys, and we threw him against the fence. He had a hoodie on, and when my partner went to pull his hoodie off, he pulled off the hoodie, and he also pulled off the scalp of his head. So it was a clean cut on his head, but it was still hanging on the back. And we were just, all you see was this shiny white skull, no blood or minimal amount of blood. And we were just blown away by it, So he pushes the hood back up. He says, we got to put that back on. We cuff him up. And, we ride in the bus. We go to the hospital. The hospital staples him up, irrigates it, and back to the station house for processing. So like these are the standout type of jobs that
He lived?
Yeah, he lived. Oh, he was fine.
Wow.
Yeah, he was fine. A little irrigation and whatever else they did, and they stapled him up, and there he is. He's collared and back to the station house 6 hours later with fingerprints on him. It was just, it's crazy.
Yeah. That's a good one. Scott's asking, was that Joey?
No, I was working with another guy that night though, but that Joey Guns was my partner. Yeah, that was my old partner was Joey Gunzo. We call him Joey Guns.
I think I've heard you mention him before, if I'm not mistaken. It might have been in the off-the-cuff interview that you did. And those pursuits, man, especially in New York City, they've always been dangerous. I was thinking, and it wasn't in Brooklyn. This happened in Queens. Nick DeMutis in '94, got killed when he was trying to block the stolen car, rammed him at 70 miles an hour. John Kelly on Staten Island in 2000, same thing, chasing a motorcycle, lost control of his car and unfortunately crashed it in the middle of the pursuit, ended up dying of his injuries. So, pursuits anywhere are dangerous. I know we look at the LAPD ones and they're very cool, as are the Texas ones, but there's a danger factor, and especially in New York City where everything is so on top of each other. You got to be mindful of pedestrians. You got to be mindful of other vehicles. I don't know how you guys do it, man. It's scary.
It is scary, and it's scary when you're sitting in that car and you're chasing that car.
Yeah.
If you got a guy that's next to you that doesn't know how to stop or slow down when you tell him to slow down, back in the 90s, cops weren't wearing seatbelts. It wasn't a thing. We never liked to wear seatbelts, but when they started pushing it, and that was like right before I went to aviation, I think around 2001 or so. You kind of saw the value of the seatbelt. When you sat in, although it would catch on your gun when you get out of the car. But, some of those pursuits, you look back and you go, oh my God, what was I doing? But you're in the moment. And you want to get the bad guy.
Well, of course, that was the thing I heard, that they didn't like it because it would catch on to the weapon, which would delay their response time and being able to get out the vehicle, especially if it was a foot pursuit, which I can understand. But at the same time, I mean, another one just popped into my head, 1995, Dave Willis. Dave Willis got thrown through the windshield of the patrol vehicle. Unfortunately, they were running to a shots fired job, and unfortunately, they ended up getting into an accident on the way, and he was killed. And had he had his seatbelt on, would he still be here? Maybe. I don't know. But it's definitely something, that I'm glad the NYPD has pushed. Officer safety. You want to get to the job. If you can't, if you're hurt before you can get to the job, you're not helping anybody. So it's a good thing to push that.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to push that. Talking about Mike Sileo here in the Mike the New Haven podcast, episode 342. There comes a point in your career, maybe late 90s heading into 2000, where you look around, you got almost a decade on the job. So you've gone from being the guy that they're mentoring to now where you could turn around and you could do a little mentorship of your own. So when you saw newer cops coming in the 9-4, tell me about mentoring them and bringing them up to speed and trying to do the same good by them as the older guys did by you when you first got there.
Yeah, I mean, when the guys came to the precinct, we always identified who the guys were that were going to be the resistant guys. And I mean, I say that lightheartedly, but they didn't want to adapt to the whole protocol. Like when you come in, the best advice you can give any new cop is keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, but keep your mouth shut. Right. And there's always that one or two guys that don't do that. So, I knew plenty of cops that wouldn't talk to any rookies. My partner was one of the guys that wouldn't talk to any of the new guys. And I just couldn't. That didn't fit my model. So I would be friendly to these guys. I wouldn't, call them my best friends, but you have to have an element of warmth to welcome them in. Because if you lock them out, they're not gonna become what you want them to be. They're not gonna be good cops. I don't think so. You got to humble them to a point, but you can't lock them out all the way. So the way I would mentor new guys, if they rode in the sector car with me, I would put them in the recorder seat. I would drive, and I'd say, if there's anything that you need help with, taking a report, 61, any question you have, I want you to ask me those questions. Because sometimes some guys are apprehensive to ask questions. If you ask questions, you get good answers. So, my mentorship was being friendly to them, not being overly friendly to them, and kind of telling them what position, thinking about when I was a rookie, what I did, and trying to model them after that.
I'm sure they appreciated that, especially as their careers progressed. They probably turned around and did the same thing eventually. So it's a good model because even
Yeah,
if they
it's
don't
tough to
say
be
it
the new
outright,
guy.
right? It's tough in any job, but they never forget that. Any kindness that's shown early on, it always pays dividends. You were a police, just to touch on it briefly, you were a police officer, of course, during the attacks of 9/11. So just being a cop during that time, I don't know if you went down to the site. I don't know if you knew any of the guys that got killed, of the 23 cops that did that day from the NYPD. But just tell me about your late 2001, early 2002.
Yeah, so I'll tell you about 9/11 in particular. I remember that at the time I was training I was actually a private pilot, so I was doing that on the side. I was working 4 to 12s, and I was training in the mornings, and I got my private pilot's license. So my partner and I, and police cops in general, have dark humor all the time. So my partner would always bust my chops about I'm flying these small planes and they're dangerous, and I remember the morning of 9/11, I got a call, and it was Joe, my partner, and he left on the answer machine, "Hey man, one of you stupid little pilots crashed into the World Trade Center. Call me back," or something. I jumped up, but then I put the TV on. I'm like, "That's not a small plane," you know. So lo and behold, I mean, what followed up after that is I go to the station house, and everybody's eager to get out there and do something. They held us at the precinct that night until I think like 10 o'clock at night, and then they threw us over to the 8-4 precinct, and we just kind of stood on the streets there, protecting mosques. And I wanted to go down to the site. Lo and behold, the weeks following that, I did get down to the site. I did get onto the pile. I did participate in the bucket brigades. And then after that, they sent us back to the commands, probably right around Thanksgiving. And then we were doing these 12-hour tours. I forget, Atlas or something, what they would call them. But yeah, I did get an opportunity to go down there. And, it's a site that I'm sure from all your guests have seen. It's mind blowing. It's the magnitude of the damage, the magnitude of what took place that day. It's everlasting and ingrained in your memory.
Yeah. I'm glad we could touch on it. It's unfortunate that I don't envy anybody that had to be down at that site, especially now when all the guys are getting sick from it.
Yeah.
But man, thank you for doing that, because it's not just about that day, the days afterwards and that cleanup effort. The fact that it was cleaned up as quickly as it was, 8 months, is a testament to the hard work that was being put in by everybody. PD, FD, construction guys coming down helping out
Yeah.
with it, iron workers. So great effort by all involved under some very tragic circumstances. So I guess I can segue, because you mentioned being a private pilot around this time, into 2005 and getting to aviation moving ahead. And before I get to leaving the 9-4 itself, when did you start taking an interest in flying, as it were?
I've always had a passion to fly, and I think most people who are fascinated by flying, it starts with a passion. So, I remember one of the cops that I was working with was telling me that he was taking flying lessons. And I'm like, I didn't think that I was able to do that. I'm like, I thought you had to go to some college and you had to, enroll in a course, but you could find a flight school on any smaller airport and participate and take flight lessons as long as you have the money to do it. So I joined up right around 97, and I started taking lessons. And probably around a year and a half later, I got my private pilot's license. And then it was taking everybody in the precinct to go flying. Hey, who wants to go flying? So I couldn't tell you. If I look into my logbook, I probably took about 15 cops from my precinct and just flying around Long Island, flying around the Montauk, going to Atlantic City, which was another whole entity. But we did that a couple of times. We went over to Foxwoods over in Connecticut, and I built flight time. And in doing so, I just got so deep into it that I started to I wanted to enhance it. Private pilot's kind of like entry. It's a recreational type of license. You really can't get hired as a commercial pilot. So I started to advance my ratings. I got an instrument rating, which gives you the authority to fly in weather, in the clouds, blind, not looking out the window. Then I got my commercial pilot's license. And at that point, I was like, all right, this could be a second career for me, you know? And I remember my flight instructor telling me around 2001, you should apply for the aviation unit. And I said, man, if I apply for the aviation unit, we've got like 35,000 cops and there's 20 pilots in the unit. You know what it's like to get into that unit? And I really didn't know anybody. I didn't have a rabbi. I didn't have a hook. So I applied and I didn't hear anything. And then it took about a year and a half. I got an interview around 2002. Kind of didn't hear from them again. 2003, 2004. I got another interview, and then I got picked up in August of 05. So I had, I believe, 2 interviews before I got picked up, or 3. No, it's actually 3 interviews before I got picked up. Yeah.
It makes sense because, again, this is the Special Operations Division of the NYPD, and where the aviation unit is housed, for those of you that are outside the New York area may not know, it's down at Floyd Bennett Field, I believe, in Brooklyn. So they share that with the highway unit, and they also share that with the emergency service unit, which you guys work very closely with, especially ESU as well as Harbor as well on some of these rescue missions that involve
scuba
surveillance and, of course, sending divers into the water under certain circumstances. So just the training, I mean, given the fact that you had gotten your commercial pilot license previously, that helps. But as far as the NYPD aspect of training, especially in high intensity situations, rescues, or pursuits on the ground, tell me about how they train you, if you can tell about that.
Yeah, I mean, when you first get to the aviation unit, you're considered a PIT. A PIT is a pilot in training, and you start. The prerequisite to get to the aviation unit, at least when I got there, was a commercial fixed wing license. You didn't have to have a helicopter license, but you had to have a fixed wing license, and they would train you in the rotorcraft. Because there's 2 different categories of pilot licenses: fixed wing and there's helicopters. So when I got there, I was a pilot in training for about 9 months or so, and it first starts out, you get assigned to a flight instructor. And you go out in a helicopter and they start teaching you how to fly a helicopter as opposed to an airplane. I mean, some of the stuff is similar, but the controls are totally different. And it's probably better to mold a pilot when you get them to the aviation unit as an airplane guy as opposed to a helicopter guy. Because some helicopter guys might want, they may fly a little bit different. And our profiles are a lot different in the aviation unit. We fly low, we fly slow. We do a lot of rescue. We do a lot of stuff over the water. So a lot of people aren't used to that stuff. So yeah, the journey probably takes you from the day you get to the aviation unit till you get to what's called a checked out pilot, and you get the authority to fly that helicopter, somewhere between 18 and 24 months.
Wow.
Probably the latter of that. Yeah. And during that period, while you're training to be a pilot, you're also training to be a tactical flight officer, which is the term TFO. So you're flying in the left seat, you're looking out the window, you're communicating with people on the ground, and you're relaying information. You're not necessarily flying the helicopter. So you're an observer. So, and that's the way the training pretty much goes. And once you get to be a checked out pilot, you have the authority to fly the helicopter as the PIC, which is the pilot in command, or let's call it a captain. And then if there's 2 of those type of people, you could fly from either side of the helicopter.
And it, once again, makes sense that it would be that intricate. And I like how they train you in dual roles to be both an observer and also the pilot in charge, because you're going to get thrown in different scenarios where that's at some point in your career, that's going to be a possibility. So to prepare for it in advance, I think, is a really smart move on their part. So I don't know if you remember your first really interesting call. Darren, I see your question. I'll get to it momentarily, as a member of the aviation unit. But is there something from that early year, maybe it was a pursuit of some sort or a rescue, that sticks out to you before we talk about 2012?
There was so many times. I mean, when you first start out there, you're not really in the role of an air sea rescue pilot. So you're really staying away from the larger aircraft, which is the Bell 412. That's kind of, later on down the line, we'll get more senior role in the unit, and you'll start going into the air sea rescue asset. So most of your career starts in the patrol unit, the patrol helicopter, and it's assisting the patrol units on the ground and participating in searches, and also it's also doubling the asset of the air sea rescue as an observant platform. So what I could tell you is there was endless pursuits, there was endless perp searches, and there was endless, what I would call like missing persons. A lot of times the precinct would call us to do a missing person search, and it's just to check the box on the 49. At 500 feet in a helicopter, looking for a missing person, unless you're in an open field, the congested area of New York City, the concentrated area of like Brooklyn or Manhattan is even worse. to look for a missing person. It's kind of just, you're making some noise, you're looking out, you're looking on your camera, you're maybe looking on the shoreline if there's water, but you really can't go further than that, you know, for a missing person search with just a clothing description. However, a perp search, you've the element or the psychological element of the helicopter noise helps, believe it or not. If you're low and you're making a lot of noise, the perp doesn't know if you see them or if they or not. So, and when you're putting the night sun, which is the searchlight, out in different areas, sometimes it has a propensity to push the perpetrator out, you know, and you could be like, oh, wow, he's out, and then we got him, and we get him on infrared, or we get him on you know, on the camera, and then we direct the ground units to lock him up. So yeah, so you start out in the patrol role in the helicopter. The air sea rescue asset comes later.
That makes sense as well. And patrol has to be quite interesting because, again, there could be days where there's a lot going on that you have to be cognizant of, but there's also days where you could just admire the sights of the city. But even then, being in the aviation unit after 9/11 took on a greater meaning because there's also the possibility of hostile aircraft. Was that something they trained you on as well?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we did have at least the latter years of my career in the aviation unit, we had an aircraft that was assigned as a QRF aircraft, which was a quick response force, basically assigned for any type of high-rise rescue or some sort of active shooter. And with that, there was a 50 caliber weapon on that aircraft that our crew chiefs were, you know, trained to utilize. So I've never had any type of rogue aircraft. I did follow a helicopter once that wasn't responding to air traffic control, and their squawk identifier code, which is basically a beacon that tells the air traffic who they are, where they are, and generally what they're doing, wasn't responsive. So we followed that helicopter, landed at the heliport, identified who the pilot was, and then handed it off to the FAA because it's out of our hands at that point.
Right.
So yeah, after 9/11, there was a lot of counterterrorism missions that we did fly.
Yeah, and Ray Kelly at the time as police commissioner definitely put a lot of an emphasis on that. Let's touch on the cross training real quick. Darren DeFries, before I get to the NYPD aspect of it, his question is, if we can highlight that, how did you guys work with the FDNY? Because I know sometimes for certain situations they come down to Floyd Bennett too.
Yeah, so they would come down. I think it was on a monthly basis. I don't remember how often they did, but we did have FDNY personnel in the helicopter when there was a fire that required an oversight, you know, an air asset. I forgot what their terminology was, but we would fly over the fire, and they would be able to communicate with their people on the ground and utilize our IR, which is infrared technology, and our cameras, so they could direct personnel to where, you know, where they needed them with the firefighting. And I forget what they called it, but we would have a fire chief come down with his chauffeur, and he would that's what it was. It was the air recon chief, and that's what it was. Yep. Yeah. So we would train with them and go on these missions a lot of times. And if they got a larger fire, they'd tell us, they'd give us a 10-minute call. We'd have the helicopter spinning, and we'd have them set up in the back, and we'd fly off to the fire with them.
They've had a lot of large ones lately. The 6th alarm in Manhattan, they had a couple brush fires that went to 2nd and 3rd alarms respectively. So they've been needing that a lot lately. I'm not sure how often they do it now because they have drones for a lot of these situations. Yeah. But it's still good to have those human eyes in the situation too. So I hope they still do.
Yeah. I was going to say that. I think there's a large increase in drone utilization now with the FDNY.
Yeah, they've used it at building collapses and certain fires as well. I think they even had it at a crane collapse. So good technology, but as long as there's a balance, no issues with that. One gentleman I did want to ask you about before I get to cross training with the NYPD units I mentioned earlier. I know his brother was an E-man, both on Suffolk and in the NYPD. Jimmy Cohn, his brother Danny Cohn's been on the show. What was it like working for Jimmy?
Jimmy Cohn was my commanding officer from 2009 to 18, so for about 9 years. Jimmy Cohn transformed the aviation unit. Jimmy Cohn, although most people have different opinions, I think he brought a lot of good to the unit. We'll call it MAGA, and we'll call it Make Aviation Great Again, because that's what Jimmy did. Although he didn't have a fan club with some people, he brought a lot to that unit. And I'll tell you one of the biggest things he did for that unit. Prior to Jimmy Cohn arriving to the NYPD Aviation Unit, we had single-engine helicopters. Now, single-engine helicopters as our patrol fleet, if you lose an engine with a single-engine helicopter, you're coming down at a vertical, profile, at about maybe 1,500 to 2,000 feet per minute, and you got to find a landing spot. You have no outs. If you lose your engine over a congested area, you're landing in the middle of Fifth Avenue, or you're landing in the middle of Eastern Parkway. That's it. Now, the chances of you successfully landing that helicopter with that engine loss or that engine failure is probably pretty low, because you have obstacles. You have light posts, you have signs, you have vehicles. So Jimmy transformed the unit, and he put together a committee to change the patrol helicopter to a twin engine helicopter. Twin engine variant helicopter gives us the ability to lose an engine and fly away with the other engine. So that in itself increased the safety margin of our mission set in the aviation unit. In addition to that, Jimmy Cohn brought an airplane asset to the NYPD Aviation Unit as well. And I participated in that for a little bit of time right before I retired. So he enhanced the mission set of the aviation unit, got us really good equipment, got us a lot of overtime, and he brought us to the forefront of aviation, of law enforcement and aviation. Jimmy Cohn was a major contributor to the aviation unit.
Oh, for sure. He retired recently. I got to get him on this show. Like I said, I know his brother very well. His brother's been on for the ESU miniseries, but I'd love to have Jimmy on. I got to shoot him a message on Facebook one of these days. Hopefully he'd be willing to do it. I think he's been retired. He left around the same time you did, right?
Yeah, I left in 2018. He left in 2019.
Yeah, about the same time. You guys overlapped. I'm glad you opened up about him. Thank you very much, because I did want to ask about him.
Sure.
As far as the cross training with ESU, getting into the air sea rescue component, and Harbor is concerned, sometimes it's Harbor's own divers, sometimes it's ESU's divers, because they're cross trained in just about everything under the sun. What was it like working with those two units?
Well, scuba was assigned exclusively. Scuba always had 2 scuba divers assigned to the aviation unit at all times. They had a little office in the hangar as well, and they were mission ready at any given time, just as the air sea rescue pilots and crew chief were. So we had 5 people assigned to that helicopter. So yeah, scuba was always assigned to the aviation unit, assigned to the air sea rescue outfit. As far as ESU, we cross trained with ESU for the special training school, rappelling, fast roping, assortment of different things. And we also added, prior to me leaving, was kind of high-rise rescue, some hoist training, and we would utilize the ESU to do that. So if it was over land, we would utilize the ESU. If it was over water, scuba was with us exclusively all the time, because they were professionals. They knew what they were doing, and they were phenomenal at what they did. And I know you had George Sickler on here.
Yeah.
George is a great friend of mine. We had a lot of laughs together, but I can't speak enough about the scuba guys. I mean, tremendous professional guys, and they were excellent at their craft, and they were very knowledgeable. I mean, really, a lot of fun with those guys too. A lot of fun.
Absolutely. And let me apologize to George and to Oscar Smith, because I forgot when I was
talking about Harbor. Another good friend of mine. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Another former guest of this show. When I was talking about Harbor and ESU, I forgot about scuba. Shout out to scuba. Of course, as you said, they do great work under some really difficult circumstances. Don't know how they do it. Not to gloss over Garrett Lindgren's comment from earlier and talking about assisting the FDNY. Did you guys have Bambi buckets? He wants to know, or no?
Yeah, we do have. As far as I know, they still have Bambi buckets. So we did do Bambi bucket training, but it was very, very rare that we utilized them in an actual mission, if at all. But we did train with them. It was part of the pilot's currency. They had to train initially for it, get checked out on it, and then also train recurrent training for the Bambi bucket in case there was some sort of brush fire that we're going to use it for. So yeah, we do have them.
Good to know. Sorry to cut you off. Didn't mean to do that. We're talking with Mike Sileo here in the Mike the New Haven podcast, episode 342. Happy to have him this evening. A personal accolade in all of this, too. Not too long after you get to aviation, detective specialist in March of 2007. I know the bomb squad does this where, and I'm maybe it's the same for aviation. You can tell me. You have to be in the unit for 18 months to get your shield. Is that how aviation works?
Actually, there was no career path in aviation. Luckily, what happened was, and I may tell this story wrong, and I apologize if I'm wrong with this, but there was a large amount of SOD personnel, not just aviation, it was ESU, it was scuba, it was Harbor, that were issued detective specialist shield. And I think it was in response to something that the FDNY had ratified in their contract. And I forgot what it was. It might have been for the first responder deal that they had set up. And one day I come into work and I'm in the unit 18 months, and they're like, you can get promoted to detective. I'm like, wow, I didn't know that. And we're sending your package up, and I'm like, wow, that's great. And I think it was like 19 of us that got promoted on the same day alongside Harbor. It was a really big SOD promotion. And from what I understand, till this day, there's no career path in the aviation unit. There's still guys there that are just white shields and been there for a long time, which is a shame because it is a specialty unit, and I really wish that there was a career path there.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you got guys in there. I mean, I know Transit used to do this back in the day. Kenny Schnetzler, who was in the rescue unit for Transit, he had police officer special assignment. Even if you're not going to give him the gold shield, which you should, by the way, at least make him police officer special assignment if such a thing existed. Ratify the contract, because look at what they're doing. It doesn't get much more special operations than that.
Yeah. My big thing is, if you're doing something outside the scope of the normal police officer, especially flying, scuba, or ESU, I think there should be some sort of meritocracy for that. It's well rewarded, I think.
I agree. And it should apply for the whole SOD division as a whole. It does. I know it does apply to certain units within SOD, which is good, but it should be around the board as well. Christian Williams is asking, does the name Green sound familiar to you? No worries if not. Thank you for being here.
We had a Green in the unit, a Sergeant Green. Yeah, right before I left, he was there a couple of years. Didn't know him too well personally, other than he was a sergeant in the unit. But yes, familiar name, absolutely.
Thanks for the question, Christian. So we'll talk about this in 2012. You got a Medal of Valor, which I think is the second highest award an NYPD member can get. Medal of Honor is the highest. Nobody wants to win that because it usually means you died in the line of duty. So you're 9 times out of 10 getting it posthumously. Medal of Valor, not so much the case, which is good. You want our members alive to receive these awards. It's June of 2012, and this is a rescue in the West Point section of New York. You've told this story on Off the Cuff, but the listeners of Mike the New Haven will hear this for the first time here. Go into it. June of 2012. What happened?
Well, June of 2012 was when I was awarded the Medal of Valor. The actual rescue took place in February of 2011. So it took a little long before the whole medal got submitted. But so what happened was, I was not supposed to work that night. It was a midnight, and I think I did a tour swap with somebody else, and I was supposed to do it 4 to 12. So we're sitting, it's one of those days which we're a reactive unit. When you're assigned to AFC Rescue in the aviation unit, you're a reactive unit. You're waiting for some job to come in, whether it's a boat in distress or some other anomaly that's taking place over the water. That night, probably around 1 o'clock in the morning, it was a windy night. It was probably, we weren't flying. I don't think we were flying that night. I believe the unit our status was we were not operational because of the winds. However, Jimmy Cohn was working that night, and Jimmy Cohn, I think, had the duty that night. And they took a call at operations, and it was from the New York State Police. And the New York State Police said, hey, we've got 2 hikers from the West Point Academy that went lost up in Storm King Mountain, which was about 50 miles north of New York City. It's on the west bank of the Hudson River. And they know where they are, but they can't find their way out, and they can't get them out. The Army doesn't have assets to do it, and the New York State Police doesn't have assets to do it. So we were wondering if you can do it. So Jimmy said, all right, let me get back to you. He called us all into the hangar. We assembled our crew chief, myself, another pilot, and we started talking about, can we do this? Now, the factors were the winds were blowing about 50 miles an hour. Now, a helicopter, winds are friendly to a helicopter. They're not favorable in some circumstances, but sometimes they are favorable. But when they're gusting, it can cause things to change in a helicopter. So we kind of all together agreed that we're going to do this mission, but we had to find how we're going to do it, how we're going to get up there, what do we need to get up there, and what we were going to do it with. So we came across, we got the NYPD helicopter, the AFC Rescue, the Bell 412, which is a larger of the 2 helicopters that are assigned to the fleet. And we got 2 ESU members to come in the back, which was Chris Condon and Billy Stevens. Billy was the other guy, and the crew chief was Fern Almeida, and the other pilot was Steve Browning. So we assembled this up, and the whole thing about when you do one of these missions is if somebody is uncomfortable and somebody says they don't want to do it, we scrub. That's it. So everybody has to agree 100%. And we agreed we were going to do it. We were going to go up there and we were going to assess what we had, and we would take it from there. So off we went. We loaded up with a bag of gas because it was going to take us a long time to get up there. because of that 50 knot headwind, the helicopter's going 50 knots slower, and it took us a while to get up there, probably about 50 minutes or so, which would probably only take about maybe 25 minutes. And we got on station, which means that you're on the location where it is. And we had another New York State Trooper helicopter pointing out with their spotlight where these guys were. We still couldn't find them. Now, the thing that was great that helped us was we had night vision goggles. So with the night vision goggles, we were able to see through the night, and we were able to see certain things. Now, the one thing that we could see was one of the guys had a cell phone. Now, this is 2011. They weren't big iPhones. They were these small little flip phones with maybe a 4-inch screen. But luckily, when they brought it up, we could see it through the night vision goggles, because the night vision goggles, what it does is it takes the surrounding light and it ingests it to bring out that image. And that's what it did. And we saw them. So at that point, we had them. We knew where they were. We pinpointed them. We marked it. And now we had to figure out how we're going to get them off of there, because it was probably about 500 feet above the ground. We had really heavy winds, and the outcropping of the mountain, the side of the mountain, was we would require us to tow the helicopter in, meaning we had to put the skids of the helicopter into the mountain and then drop the hoist line and bring them out. So that was concerning because of the wind. So we did, we went in and we did a couple of dry runs, and we said, all right, we could do this. We got the hoist, and the crew chief, Fern, was like, I could drop the hook right to them. It's no problem. So we did this. We put ourselves into a hover. Steve Browning was the pilot. He was a military guy, excellent guy. Flew that helicopter meticulously. I mean, we were 20 feet away from probably the edge of the side of the mountain. And all I remember was, if you're the co-pilot, you're managing two different things. You're managing the outside of the helicopter, but you're also managing the engines, and you're managing the transmission, and you're managing temperatures and torque levels. So I'm looking in, I'm watching the torque, making sure we don't, overstress the helicopter. And then I'm also looking at the ends of the blades, which is called the tip path plane, to make sure we don't strike any objects. With the night vision goggles, it gives you a great visualization of the end of the blades, which you won't see with the naked eye. And that's what we did. So I kept my eyes on there, and off we dropped Chris Condon down. Chris went down, unhooked, and we took up one of the hikers, put him on the helicopter, and we were pretty heavy at that point. We couldn't really put too many more people onto the helicopter, and we said, you know what, let's take the one. We flew off, dropped him in a field somewhere, which I think was called Soldiers Field, and then we flew back, dropped the hook back down to Chris, and we brought both of them up, and then we successfully got them both off the mountain. But we left Chris out there, which was really concerning, just to leave the guy. And right, the temperatures were probably about, 17 degrees. And probably with the winds, it was probably the wind chill factor was probably about 5 degrees. So, performance for the helicopter is great in cold weather, but not for the human body, So it was great that we pulled that off. I mean, it was really, really a rewarding moment after we got everybody off and all was said and done,
Job well done, man. Because I was vaguely familiar with the story. And apologies for getting my dates crossed up, but it's great to hear it again now. And I've been trying to get Chris on the show for a while. Him and I are connected on LinkedIn and Facebook. I gotta get him on because I knew he was involved in that. He says he left me there for like an hour, -5.
Well, there you go. See, Chris is tuned in. Yeah, I remember talking to him on the radio, and I didn't realize it was that long. Wow. Thanks, Chris.
Good to see you, Chris, and come on the show, buddy. Been trying to get you some time now for the ESU mini series. So, after something like that and getting recognized for it a year and change later, granted it was a team effort, but that had to feel very good. So when they, listen, think of the guys that have gotten the Medal of Valor award over the years. When they put that medal on you, tell me about what your emotions were.
I was kind of humbled. I mean, and there's a little disappointment as well, because I believe Fern was our crew chief. Everybody in that helicopter should have gotten that. I was a little disappointed because Fern, who was our crew chief, did not get it. He had retired, but I thought they should have did it posthumously. Like after his retirement, they didn't do it. But I look at the whole Medal for Valor in a different sense than most do. you know, was it warranted? I was like, this is just my scope of what we do. This is, I didn't, not saying I wasn't worthy for it. I think we certainly were, but there are so many other things that I saw on the police department that were unjust, where other people should have got the medal for valor. So, you know, humbled for sure. It was an amazing moment to get that award, but I just wish Fern would have got it as well. I mean, it didn't happen, but um, it's one of those things where it's just you go to work, you do what you got to do, and you come home and you don't really think about getting an award. But certainly a nice feeling for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Have you kept in touch with those that were rescued that night, or not really?
No, I think we had like a conference call probably about a week after in the CEO's office. And they were on. They thanked us personally, and then later on, I believe their general came down and gave us a civilian equivalent of some sort of medal of honor or something. I forgot what it was. I'll be honest with you, because it's been so long ago. But their general did fly into the aviation base to thank us personally, which was really nice.
That's nice. That was very nice of them. You got second grade in June of 2015, another bump up. And again, not bad for a unit that, as you said earlier, may not have a career path. I mean, getting the gold shield in and of itself is an honor. It's one of the ones that's most portrayed in the movies, and that's no knock on the other ranks. The other ranks are great too, but everyone knows that gold shield. So many police departments across the country have copied methods or iterations of the gold shield for their own. So getting second grade, I imagine, again, a career as long as yours had been, by that point, 10 years in aviation, had to feel pretty good too, and a bump in pay at that.
Oh yeah, I was waiting for that for a while because my role had changed in the aviation unit, and it was very surprising that I got the gold shield. But once I got it, now I started to do more things in the unit. I became a flight instructor. I was very instrumental in getting 13 pilots checked out into the new helicopter and getting them instrument ratings, which again would allow them to fly into the clouds and without any visual references. So that was a prerequisite, and I had a good time doing that. I loved teaching guys. I really enjoyed getting into the helicopter now and teaching the new guys how to do certain things that I did. I wouldn't say I didn't enjoy the patrol or the air sea rescue aspect of it, but I really enjoyed teaching, and I did that for a long time. Up until the day I left, I taught. So it was really nice to get the bump in second grade, and from what I understand now, there's a couple of guys in there that are getting the same. And there's even some first graders there, which is really nice to hear.
That's good. As they should.
Yeah.
They should. We fast forward to April of 2018, 27 years in the job. There's always that moment where you say, all right, I've had my fun, time to go. And sometimes it's a series of things that ultimately leads you to that conclusion, family, an injury, whatever the case may be, just general satisfaction of what you accomplished. What was it for you that made you say, all right, you know what? This is a good time to go. I got my second career waiting for me. I did everything I wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, you reach a point where you start feeling like the old guy there. You start, and the younger guys start busting your chops, and not saying that you take that seriously, but you kind of know you got to make room for other people. And I've reached my pinnacle there. I got everything that I had to get out of the unit, the training, the pilot ratings, the enjoyment of doing what I did. And I was on the cusp. I was only 47 years old, and I said, it's time to make a career move, because in the aviation industry, as you approach, or if you're 50, your marketability goes down a lot. So I wanted to capture that, and it was a tug and war. It was a real emotional tug of war in my head to leave, but I had so much more that I wanted to look forward to do in the future, and that I'm doing right now. And I look back and I'm thankful for the career I had. The flying that we do, or that I did in the aviation unit, is flying that you'll never experience in any other type of organization, unless you're doing law enforcement again.
Right.
And particularly in Manhattan. I mean, you could fly over the city at night and you're just in awe every time. And even retired, as I fly now, 8 years or 7 years later, I'm still in awe of the sight of Manhattan lit up at night from the helicopter or from an airplane. It's mind blowing. It's mind blowing. It really is beautiful.
It's a heck of a view. And I was going to ask you about that life in the private sector now, being a pilot. What are your days like?
Well, I recently, in the last 18 months, been flying a jet airplane now for a private owner corporate. I've kind of gone away from the helicopter industry. The helicopter industry in New York City it's a dwindling industry, because there's a lot of environmental issues with it, a lot of noise issues with it. So, I had to pivot, and I was an airplane pilot already when I first started. So now I'm back to flying airplanes again. I just recently, let's see, yeah, about last year I stopped flying a helicopter, and now I'm full time exclusively in the airplane. I'm working for a private owner who has a corporate jet, and I fly primarily on the weekends. A couple of maybe 2 trips to Europe a year, and some domestic stuff. So it's really enjoyable. I get a lot of downtime, and I'm a salaried employee, so that even sweetens the deal. you
Yeah,
know?
of course. Get by,
Yeah,
take care of yourself, take care of your family. And then there's nothing more you can ask for. And that's the thing that I always love to see with guys, no matter what department they're retiring out of, the FD or the PD, the second act. If you got the second act going, because retirement's not easy, as my buddy Danny McNally said on the show several years ago, retirement's a full-time business. It's a tough thing to do. And he was right then, he's right now. When guys are able to transition and see that there is life after the job and do just as well for themselves in the private sector as they did when they were on the job, you always love to see that. And hopefully that's a good thing for all the young guys on the job now. Line it up now. Get good at some things outside the job now. That way, when the time comes, you got something you can transition to, and there's no void there. And it
yeah,
doesn't seem like there's a void with you, which is good to see.
yeah. No, it's life is grand, and I'm blessed. I really feel that.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I get to the rapid fire, Chris Ebdon's in the chat is asking, were you at Aviation when Lou Severo was the XO?
Yes, Louis is a good guy. Yep, and when I left and Jimmy Cohn left, he became the CEO of aviation.
Okay. Is he
Yeah.
still there now, or is he since retired?
No, not. It's my understanding that he's not. I think he's still on the job, but
Okay.
not at the aviation unit.
Okay. Well, shout out to everybody from aviation that continues to get it done on patrol for the special calls. Definitely another, unsung component of the NYPD and a huge part of the Special Operations Division. It's a regret of mine. So I went down to REMA Day, which the Emergency Service Unit holds at Floyd Bennett Field every last Saturday of April. Sergeant John Flynn, who you probably know,
I know John very well. Yeah.
very good man. And shout out to John. He wanted to take me up in one of the helicopters if the weather permitted. Unfortunately, it was a rainy day, really windy too, so we couldn't. They were grounded for that day,
Yeah.
understandably.
Yeah.
But hopefully, if I'm down there next year for REMA Day, and 6 months from now, I can tag along for that, assuming that the weather's a lot better. Of course, the one year I didn't go, which was this year, was a beautiful day. So hopefully it evens
Uh,
out for me when I go down to Floyd Bennett the next time around. But again, big shout out to aviation. Thanks for all you did, Mike, and thanks
Thank
for
you.
telling your stories tonight. So you're not off the hook yet, as you know. You watch the show. Here comes the rapid fire, and it's a pretty straightforward one. 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. First one, either on patrol or in aviation. Funniest call you ever responded to?
Ah, geez. Funniest call I've ever responded to. I'm trying to think about this. I have to be on patrol. I think it would have to be on patrol for sure. Yeah. And this is dark. This is very dark.
That's fine. Gallows humor is part of the Mike Denuaven podcast.
We got a call for an explosion in a home, and we walk into the house, and this is really dark. But the guy, we walk into the house. I smell gunpowder, and I see a blood trail, and I go up to the window. The window's open, but there's a screen on the window, and on the window in the sill is somebody's thumb detached from their hand. So I follow the blood trail, and we follow the blood trail into the bathroom. There's a guy under the sink, and he just has the water running on his hand, and he's like, "I blew up my thumb." And I said, "What happened?" He goes, "I went to throw the M80 out the window, and it bounced off the screen because I thought the screen was open, and I picked it up, and he blew up the thumb." Now, again, dark humor, but he was fine. He lost his thumb, but I wouldn't say it was the funniest call, but it's the most memorable call for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you got a stun back. They got it on ice. I'm
Yeah.
assuming, hopefully, and even then, it's a heck of a story to tell. Lesson learned: don't have M80s in your house. Maybe just a
Oh
good
no,
idea.
and have your screen open.
And have your screen open too. Have
Yeah.
your screen open too. As far as patrol is concerned, this one I like asking the guys lately on the PD and FD side. If you could pick one little era from your career across the 27 years to go back to, what is the sweet spot? If you could go back to work tomorrow, what's the sweet spot you're hopping in the time machine traveling back to?
Oh man, from 1995 through 2000, some of the best times I had on patrol, the most laughs, the greatest bunch of guys and gals, and it was just the the front row seat to the. I think you've said this from so many other guys on here, but you have a front row seat to the biggest circus in the world, and it was just great, and it's just the people I worked with was just phenomenal, phenomenal.
I'm going to borrow a line from Freddie Manzalillo, retired sergeant out of the Arson Explosion Squad. Greatest show on earth, but the NYPD has the backstage pass.
That's right.
That's true.
There you go.
And the FDNY as well. You guys both got the
Oh, yeah.
backstage pass, the greatest show on earth. And that's, again, ironclad. A lot of details you work between patrol and aviation, I'm sure. Favorite detail you ever worked?
By far, I would think the best detail I ever got to work was New Year's Eve. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's cold, but it's just you get in there early, everybody, gets into the pens, the thing happens, and then within 20 minutes, everybody's gone. And that's it. But it's just nice to be there. I mean, it's definitely on a lot of people buckets, a lot of people from outside the country, particularly on their bucket list, but to be a cop there, it's phenomenal. It's great.
And you get paid for it. Ain't bad either.
And you get paid for it. There you go.
That's the best part of it.
Yeah.
Fourth question, rapid fire. And you could say multiple because, again, different snapshots of your career. I'm sure you went to different places. Favorite bar, and if not bar, restaurant in the city. You could say multiple.
Oh, wow. Well, as a cop in the 9-4 precinct, we used to attend multiple bars. But I think the best bar that we ever had, that we had a lot of time, was the Call Box in the 9-4 precinct. It was just a small little bar, and it was on Meeker Avenue, I think, at the time. But a lot of good memories there. A lot of good memories. Got a lot good laughs and good people that hung out there.
I love the name too. It's a clever name.
Yeah.
And the last question, the rapid fire advice you would give anyone coming on the job now.
Eyes open, ears open, keep your mouth shut, watch your back, and cover your ass.
That's true. All of it. Yeah. As we said earlier, the pendulum is a little bit different right now for New York City police officers, but hopefully the pendulum does always swing, and hopefully it'll swing back the way it used to go. Back when you were working in the 90s, post Bratton, of course, and then during the Kelly years as well. But to all the guys and gals active now, especially those in aviation and on the street and patrol, wherever you may be, please continue to stay safe and heed that advice. It's good advice, not just for the police department, but for any job. I want to thank everyone that tuned in tonight. I see all you in the chat, and I appreciate all you in the chat. But before we say goodbye to the audience, any shout outs to anyone or anything, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, a shout out to all the guys in aviation that I spent so many years with, all my friends. Most of them are gone from there, but fly safe, be safe, and to all the guys in the 9-4 precinct. I mean, that was the highlight of my career. Those guys were just phenomenal. So
absolutely,
yeah,
it's a great place to work. Thanks again. Stick around. We'll talk off air. And again, thanks to everybody that tuned in tonight. For those of you that'll tune in later, either watching the replay, of course, or listening on the audio side. Coming up next on the Mike the New Haven podcast, he started his career in Alexandria, Virginia, but he's originally a native New Yorker, came back to the FDNY in 1994, got to Rescue 1 in 1998, where he stayed until he retired in 2014. Been trying to get him for a while. First saw him years ago in the Still Riding documentary, which is still one of my favorites to this day. Joel Kanaski will be here for volume 63 of The Best of the Bravest, interviews with the FDNY's elite. That's this Friday, 6 p.m. Very much looking forward to that show. Years in the making, much like tonight's interview was years in the making. We'll line up the week after that, working on a few guests, so I'll keep you guys posted on social media if we're able to book people for the ensuing week. Now, for tonight's outro song, for those of you on the audio side, fitting from his 1976 album, Fly Like an Eagle. Who else but Steve Miller? Fly Like an Eagle. In the meantime, on behalf of retired NYPD Detective Mike Sileo and producer Victor and all of you in the chat, I'm Mike Colón. We'll see you next time, and stay safe, everyone. Take care.